Good Sunday morning, and thank you for watching Beyond the Headlines. Well, it is finally over. For a year, Ricardo Rangel waited patiently. He waited even after a trial judge ruled that he won his election back in November of 22. Rangel waited even after the Fourth Court of Appeals affirmed that decision last November. But patience is a virtue. And when the Texas Supreme Court refused to hear Daisy Campos-Rodriguez's case a few weeks ago, her last appeal option, Rangel couldn't wait any longer. And he was sworn in the same day the ruling came down. Today, he's getting up to speed. And despite the long wait, Rangel shared some parting words for his former opponent.
We went through the legal system. You know, if there's any, doubts that your team didn't do the right thing, well, it's unfortunate. Everybody, I paid for my team, and my team helped me out. My lawyers did their job. They found the information. If your lawyer didn't do that, well, it's not my problem. I can't fix that. But at the same time, I wish you nothing but the best. Y que Dios me la bendiga.
And one member of the legal team describes just how excruciating that effort was.
Well, sometimes there's a saying, I think MLK said, justice delayed is justice denied. So we had to wait. The legal system, unfortunately, there's a lot of cases pending, a lot of important cases. So we had to wait, and it was what made it harder. But in the end, I think it's going to be worth it. I think it was a lot of work presenting the case, getting the evidence, getting the witnesses, getting the documents. But then the waiting, because there was nothing we could do. We just had to wait.
And the other member of that legal team joins us today, along with our regular panel. We have Marty Ciarroa joining us this morning. Marty, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to everybody. Good morning.
We have our KGNS political contributor, Sergio Mora, and KGNS anchor and investigative reporter, Mindy Caso. Mindy, I'll let you start with the questions.
Okay. Well, there's so much to ask, so little time, but I want to start because I was there, when you and Valdemar were first trying the case under visiting Judge Susan Reed. And the thing that, and I was there throughout the whole process, of course, the thing that I want to ask you is, throughout the whole process, you always felt, you and the legal team always felt so confident about your case, whether it was with Susan Reed, whether it was with the Fourth Court of Appeals, and then, of course, the Texas Supreme Court. You always felt like you had a very strong case, and you were always positive that you were going to come out the winner. Why is that? What is it about this case that was so solid?
Well, from the beginning, when the client first came to the office and we were able to review election records, public records, employment records, Webb County Appraisal District records, it was very obvious from independent documents, nothing related to the voter. From all of the other documents related to the voter, we were able to see very clearly that there was a concerted effort, an intentional effort to violate the law by many people in District 2 to vote for the contestee. And so all we did, and you heard Mr. Garcia say earlier, it was a lot of work, but once we found that, our confidence grew exponentially. When we came to trial, even when we rested our case, Ms. Caso, we had approximately 23 or 24 voters, illegal voters, waiting to testify. Wow. So we just felt that at the time that we rested our case, we had more than enough voters to beat that 6 vote difference that came up on election night.
Okay. Election night was a very important ruling also, because there were recounts after that. Talk to us a little bit about why it was so important for the judge to deem election night as the official one.
Well, the software that everybody uses, all of the counties use, actually digitally recreate the ballot and the vote. And so this court succinctly, correctly relied on the digital ballots, and that is called a vote cast record, a VCR. I think I said that right. And that was actually recorded on the night that all of the ballots were counted. So we went back to the beginning. We went back to the truth. And that's where we saw that 6 vote difference. But the trial showed that Mr. Rangel won fair and square, and that the contestee never won that race.
Wow.
I have a question. These practices, and unfortunately, it's not the first time that we hear about these practices being done during elections here. I'm happy with the result of this case. Hopefully, it will deter people from engaging in these kind of practices in the future. There's one specific fact that really struck out to me, and I think it encapsulates the problem, and that was a bunch of these voters all registered under the same address. Can you tell us about that specific instance and what it implies in terms of people actually registering to vote in an empty building, or what was the specifics here?
So we very specifically alleged in our pleading, and we proved by clear and convincing evidence, Mr. Mora, which is the highest burden of proof in the civil law. By clear and convincing evidence, we were able to prove that there were 9 addresses with 54 voters living in these 9 addresses. And it's just not possible for 54 people to live in these 9 addresses. But in addition, the way that we were able to prove by clear and convincing evidence that they did not live there was from their own employment records, from their own Texas driver's license, from their bank records, from the Webb County Appraisal District records. And to get to answer your specific question, which is I think where you're going with this, is how is it that we can stop this? How can we stop people from migrating into a district to vote for their family friend, their comadre, their compadre? We have a brand new law. And obviously, this has been an issue for decades in this state. And that law is the first time, this is the first time that we have been able to test that law. And I have to tell you, Mr. Mora, that Mr. Rangel was brave enough to bring this lawsuit, and guess what? Now that the trial court has entered a judgment, the Court of Appeals has issued not 1 but 2 legal opinions, and the Supreme Court has confirmed and verified all 3 of these opinions. He's now in the books. The entire state of Texas will always refer to the facts of this case, which I've already told you, it was a very intentional, insidious attempt to subvert our election laws. Well, we are now the poster child for how to prove election fraud and what people will not do in the future, because we have shown them the blueprint of how to prove it.
Wow.
I have an additional question.
Sure.
These individuals, whether it be 1754, the people that actually committed the voter fraud
Yes, sir.
by voting where they don't live. So are they liable in terms of for committing fraud? And more importantly, does the organizer of this effort, is that person held into account?
So let me answer it a long answer that puts it in perspective, because I know where you're going. Voting is a fundamental constitutional right that all of us have. So it is sacred. And it is really the basis for our democracy. It's what makes our country strong and great. And so when you violate the election laws, it really dilutes our democracy. There's a national conversation going on right now about election fraud that I think is a bunch of hooey. What happened here should not happen again. The people that commit it is a crime, Mr. Mora. It is an absolute crime. It's a Class A misdemeanor or a state jail felony if it's aggravated. And in this case, we have alleged that at least one of the voters committed aggravated perjury. It is beyond Mr. Rangel. He does not have the authority to further investigate that criminal aspect. I'm confident that that is going on. I cannot tell you what the result of that is because that's not within our purview. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yes, there are criminal aspects to all of this. And by the way, Judge Susan Reed, our trial judge, who was the former Bexar County District Attorney, she found that they voted illegally.
Wow.
At the beginning, we talked about patience. As a legal team, having to go through all of these appeals, is that something you all are used to? Is there some frustration on your part because of the fact that it has to be drawn out so long? Give us some perspective on the thought process.
Ms. Caso framed the question correctly, and the question was, how frustrating, how difficult is this? And the answer is, as an attorney, as a practicing lawyer for 36 years, it's not. That everybody has a right to do and to file these appeals. We don't, we support that. The problem that we have here, Mr. Villarreal, is that we showed through clear and convincing evidence. That means that a fact is likely more true than not true. Mm-hmm. That's a very high burden. We showed that, and it was confirmed in San Antonio, yet there was another appeal. It's everybody's right to appeal. But Ms. Caso said, you were always very confident. And yes, I was confident. I was confident because I knew that what we had done, the evidence that we presented, the papers that we presented, the legal precedent that we presented, and the methods and manners that we used were going to survive.
Is there any way, because what strikes me the most is that Councilman Rangel, because he was a victim of voter fraud perpetrated against him, he lost a year of his term that he's not going to get back. And especially like the time it took for the Fourth Court to take up the case, which was close to a year. I mean, is there a way to, yes, I know there's a lot of cases, they're dealing with a lot of immigration matters. It's understandable, but when it's clearly interfering with the government of our city, and in our city we had such a divided council, that this makes a tremendous difference in the direction that the city is going to take. Is there any way through legislation or anything to try to like, okay, these cases should be prioritized, should be given a fast track. Mm-hmm. This is just completely unfair to the person that actually won the election, and it's unfair to the city of Laredo, to any municipality or organism.
Mm-hmm. Two comments on that. The real victim, frankly, were the people that live in District 2.
Yes.
Because the person that they elected to that seat didn't take seat. Mm-hmm. And it's the people of that district, whether or not they were represented during the time that this case was on appeal, and what the matters were before the city council, I don't know. But let's always remember that it was the people in that district that are the real victims. Mm-hmm. Secondly, yes, sir, I think that the reason that the contestee stayed in office when she was not elected to that seat ever, I will say. The reason that she was allowed to stay there is because the law says that you may stay there until you get a mandate or a final judgment. Right. So yes, there probably should be a change in the law because it is not fair, again, to the real victims here. It's the people of the district.
Right.
Marty, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here.
Thank you so much.
All right, when we come back, love her, hate her, or just don't care either way, for her, Priscilla Villarreal's next move may be the Supreme Court. You may know her as Gordiloca, and a divided ruling is only adding more sparks to a fiery case. That case is next. Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. When does the First Amendment apply, and was a constitutional right violated in an obvious way? That was one of many questions the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit attempted to clarify in a lawsuit originating from right here in Laredo. But a federal court ruled against social media personality Priscilla Villarreal, otherwise known as La Gordiloca. A few weeks ago, the appeals court ruled in favor of both City of Laredo and Webb County officials. Villarreal had sued. The ruling is based on a lawsuit in which Villarreal alleges First and Fourth Amendment violations. That was from a 2017 arrest for publicly releasing non-public law enforcement information. After a state judge dismissed the criminal case against Villarreal, Villarreal filed a lawsuit for damages. However, the 9-7 decision narrowly found that the officials were entitled to qualified immunity. In a social media post, Villarreal says her next step is to appeal the case to the Supreme Court. And that is where we continue our discussion this morning with the panel. Boy, Sergio, this is another loaded story that we have here in front of us, and a very important one emanating from right here in the Gateway City as far as First Amendment rights are concerned.
That's right.
It's very surprising because, I mean, you had at one point, like in 2020, George Will, the famous conservative columnist for the Washington Post, write about the ramifications of this case, what it means for First Amendment cases going forward, period. And it's gotten a lot of attention in legal circles because of the fact that is a journalist, in this case a citizen journalist, entitled to get information that's leaked from the government and run with it. And they say for commercial gain, which all journalism is for commercial gain. They say the Pentagon Papers was exactly the same thing. A government official leaked information and the journalists ran with it. One of the most famous leaks in history. Is it illegal or not? And Webb County District Attorney's office says they are in their right to have arrested her because she got the information inappropriately. And the statute that they're basing themselves on basically says that a government can't leak information for financial gain. But that statute was written in reference to bid rigging, in terms of a government official releases information so a person can bid, like very common here in Laredo.
Right.
So they're saying it doesn't apply. But so it opens a case of like, okay, so a journalist can only talk about information that the government releases through public information requests, meaning that the government has a right to dictate what journalists can or cannot write about. And the Gordiloca says, no, I mean, if she came across this information through her context and everything, it's First Amendment rights, she should be able to publish it. So this ruling, the Fifth Circuit ruling, was very evenly divided in like the traditional conservatives favoring inside of the government, like no, that was inappropriate. She couldn't have used that leaked information. And the four that were dissenting, including like 2 Trump appointees. And the Libertarian Party ideology is very in sync with like, hey, we have a right to do this. We have a right. Our First Amendment rights are sacred. We can talk about whatever we want. Yeah. And so they're saying that, no, she should have had the right to be able to use that information. So now this establishes a precedent where every time a journalist gets information from a leaked source, they're going to bring up, the Webb County versus Priscilla Villarreal, the court ruled that citizen journalists cannot use this information. So it's humongous in the precedent that it's setting.
Let's before you say anything, Mindy, let's hear what the judges had to say, and then you can speak. Villarreal and others portray her as a martyr for the sake of journalism. That is inappropriate. She could have followed Texas law or challenged that law in court before reporting non-public information from the back channel source. By skirting Texas law, Villarreal revealed information that could have severely emotionally harmed the families of decedents and interfered with ongoing negotiations. That was Edith H. Jones and what she had to say. The other quote we have is on the other side, and it says, the Constitution doesn't mean much if you can only ask questions approved by the state. Freedom of speech is worthless if you can only express opinions favored by the authority. The government may not answer or agree, but the citizen gets to ask and to speak. That's Judge James Ho. And so, Mindy, your thoughts on what we're talking about?
Looking at both sides of it, there is a lot of validity to both sides of it, and I'm hoping that the answer lies in the middle, because I know in representing KGNS and in representing journalists who work for media outlets and newspapers and media outlets, we are held to such a high standard, and we do not release information unless it is a factual, it has been fact-checked. Even just on deaths, we want to make sure that family members do not find out that their loved one has died through social media or through an unverified source. That's just who we are as a media, and we feel very strongly about that. And I'm proud to follow high standards like that, because I don't ever want anybody to find out something that A, is not true, unfactual, that came out of my mouth, or a loved one passed away and they didn't even hear about it first, and were able to process that before having to hear about it. So I hope that there is, I do hope that the Supreme Court does take it on. I'd like to see what they say, but I do hope that there is some kind of medium ground there, because I don't believe that both sides, it should be just that one side. I think there's a little bit of truth to both sides.
Serge, but that's society today. And if you follow Gordiloca and other social media influencers, that's what people want. They want to know immediately what's happening and who it was and so forth.
But then they need to
and
realize
The more
that.
salacious, the better.
Oh, I know
Well,
exactly.
I hope that they realize then that this information, there should be a little caveat, on their statements that say, oh, wait, but it really hasn't been verified yet. So there could be just a little bit
but
of,
I don't think most people.
I agree with you, Ruben,
that's
that people
the
take
society
things
we're
at
living
face
in. That's
value.
what social media is now.
But then this is what happens. And then, it turns out that, oops, wait, okay, there was a mistake in that. And that's not right.
Well, I think that an important point is that social media came of age, like in the last decade or so. Before, a journalist didn't have the resources or the ability to disseminate their work, their reporting, their information. Only mainstream media outlets had that. Social media opened it wide up that anybody with a phone can go and do the same, not the same kind of job, but like the concept, like go and report on stuff and upload it. And she found a winning formula in that with her personality and her reporting and everything, she amassed a huge following. So, I mean, it's part of the zeitgeist, and like, okay, now we're dealing with this issue, and it's a crazy, crazy challenge to the traditional sort of concept that we have about First Amendment rights, because before we only applied them to like media organizations.
Well,
not
this could be
citizens,
could be the case that changes everything for social media journalists.
I mean, and unfortunately, I agree with absolutely everything you said. I've seen what happens when somebody runs with a story and it's not true, or the facts are incorrect or whatever.
Yeah, the consequences.
But at the same time, I do think that journalists should be able to use information that's leaked.
Yeah.
And I think that the forbidding all journalists, from using information that's leaked, I do think that sort of is going to limit the good work that journalists can do, and that, okay, the only information I can use, period, is what they give me through public information requests. And in this city, you've seen that they deliberately stall the public information request process to hide stuff, which obviously is not in the best interest of absolutely anybody.
Pretty sure the story is not over, so
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. All right, when we come back, it's the one thing our panelists cannot stop thinking about from the past week. All right, welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. Our one thing this morning is that we don't have time for a one thing because the discussion was so intense and there were so many things to talk about that we had no time for our one thing. So save your one thing, I guess.
For next week.
Yes, can you do that? And we'll have Luis back, so that's fair. All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Serge. Thank you, Mindy. And thank you for watching. Have a blessed rest of your Sunday.